The night was black as coal when Samuel Boyd cracked open his crooked ranch door and found her there, a black orphan girl, no more than 12, barefoot in the snow, eyes wide with fear. She didn't speak, just clutched a ragged blanket like it was all that stood between her and the grave. Samuel had near nothing himself, no wife, no children, barely enough beans to last the week, and yet, when the wind howled through that hollow and the girl swayed like she might fall, he pulled her inside. By dawn his life had turned upside down, because when he stepped out to fetch water from the frozen trough, he froze at the sight 100 neighbors crowded his yard, wagons loaded with food, hay, tools, blankets, more than he'd ever owned in his life. The poorest rancher in the valley had given shelter to a child nobody wanted, and the whole valley had come to repay him. But how'd it come to that? Well, you have to know Samuel Boyd, the man folks called Poor Sam, though never to his face. And you have to understand just how harsh that winter was, and how one stubborn old rancher ended up making a choice that rippled clear through the county. Samuel Boyd wasn't born to greatness. He came from hard stock, Scotch-Irish settlers, who carved out a piece of the Kansas prairie back before the railroad came through. His daddy had been a mule driver, his mama a woman worn thin by 11 births of which only 4 lived past childhood. Sam was the youngest, and by the time he came along, the family's spirit was near spent. Life hardened him quick. He worked cattle before he could read, ran trap lines before his voice changed, and by the time he was 20, he'd already buried more kin than he cared to count. Folks said he had a quiet strength, the kind that didn't need boasting. But strength don't always put bread on the table. By 60, Samuel had outlived nearly everyone who shared his blood. No wife ever stayed, some said because he was too poor, others because he was too proud. His ranch sat low in a hollow, where the wind cut mean and the creek froze early. Fences sagged, the barn leaned, and his herd numbered fewer than 10 cows. Most men would have sold out, moved to town, maybe taken up work at the mill, but not Samuel. He was stubborn as a stump. He stayed on his daddy's land, even if it meant living on cornbread and beans. Neighbors pitied him, sure. Some mocked him behind closed doors, calling him Poor Sam Boyd, the man who had nothing but pride. But nobody expected him to change. He was like a tree stump in the field, half dead maybe, but not about to move. The winter of '89 was the cruelest in a generation. Snow came early, laying heavy by November. The cold snapped bones, froze wells, and drove coyotes bold enough to prowl daylight. Feed prices soared, and even men with healthy herds started losing cattle. Families burned furniture to keep warm. Samuel's cabin was drafty, his stores thin. He had 1 sack of beans, half a sack of cornmeal, and whatever he could scrape from hunt. Most nights, his supper was no more than a skillet of corn mush with salt. He'd sit by the fire in his threadbare coat, dog at his feet, listening to the wind claw at the shingles. It was a lean existence, but he'd borne leaner. What he hadn't borne was company. His days were spent alone, his nights quieter still. Some said Sam liked it that way. Others guessed loneliness gnawed at him more than hunger. Either way, the man had no kin, no friends who came calling. Just him, the dog and the... It was near midnight when he heard it, faint, almost lost in the wind. A knock at the door. Samuel thought he'd imagined it. Then it came again, soft but steady. He pushed himself from the chair, joints aching, and took down the rifle hanging by the door. Out here, a knock at midnight rarely meant good news. He cracked the door and let the lantern light spill out, and there she was, a girl no more than 12, shivering on the porch, skin dark as night, lips blue from cold, barefoot in the snow. Her dress was torn, her blanket little more than rags. She stared at him with eyes too big for her face, too hollow for her age. Samuel froze. He didn't know her, didn't know where she'd come from. An orphan maybe, or runaway. Lord knew the county didn't have a place for colored orphans. Most ended up wandering till someone took them in, or till the winter took them. She didn't speak, just swayed where she stood, and for a heartbeat, Samuel considered shutting the door, not out of cruelty but survival. He had little enough for himself. Another mouth might mean the difference between making it through winter or not. But then she coughed, weak, ragged, and his dog, usually quick to bark, whined low in its throat. Samuel's heart clenched. He thought of his sisters long buried, of graves dug too small. Without another word he dropped the rifle, took her by the shoulders and pulled her inside. The cabin was no palace, but compared to the storm outside, it might as well have been heaven. Samuel wrapped her in his only quilt, threadbare but warm, and set her by the fire. She didn't thank him, just stared at the flames like she couldn't believe they were real. He poured her the last of his beans thickened with lard, and she ate like a starved. Watching her, Samuel felt a twist in his chest he hadn't known in years. It was both ache and warmth, like a man remembering what it meant to care. That night as she slept on his cot, Samuel sat by the fire with his dog, staring at the dwindling woodpile. He'd given up half his food, his quilt, his bed, and tomorrow he'd have to face the neighbors. Neighbors who might not look kindly on him taking in a black orphan when he couldn't feed himself. But as the firelight flickered, Samuel muttered to the dog, "We'll make do, we always." Morning came gray and bitter. Samuel rose stiff, stoked the fire, and stepped outside to fetch water. That's when he saw it. The hollow was full, wagons lined along the fence, horses steaming in the cold, men and women, children bundled in shawls, neighbors from miles around, all standing in his yard, and in their hands, sacks of flour, bushels of potatoes, sides of ham, blankets, nails, even tools. For a moment Samuel thought he was dreaming. Then one man stepped forward, old neighbor Carson, and said, "Heard you took her in, Sam. Figured it was time somebody took care of you." And that's where everything changed. What Samuel didn't know, what none of them knew, was how that one act of kindness would stir up old grudges, test loyalties, and force the valley to face questions it had long buried. Because kindness ain't free, not in a place where survival rides thin. And before the season was out, Samuel Boyd would find himself caught between mercy and survival, in ways he'd never imagined. When Samuel Boyd stepped out into that cold morning and saw 100 neighbors crowding his yard, he thought for half a second that maybe they'd come to drive him off his land. That's how sudden and strange it felt. A man who lived 40 years without a soul darkening his gate now had half the county standing there before the frost had even melted from the rails. But then Carson, stooped old farmer with frost in his beard, stepped forward with a sack of flour under his arm. "Sam," he said, "heard you took in that girl." The words carried through the yard. Folks shifted their feet, some nodding, some keeping their eyes down, and Samuel, still groggy from sleep and half believing this was a dream, answered, slow, "Aye, she was freezing to death. Couldn't turn her out." That's when the wagons opened. Women pulled out blankets. Boys carried firewood. A rancher led forward a fat hog, tied and squealing. It was like the valley itself had decided overnight to repay Samuel for a kindness he never thought twice about. But beneath the gifts lay something else, something sharp, watching, because not everyone in that yard had come to celebrate. Samuel took the flour from Carson, still bewildered. "You all didn't need to," Carson cut him off. "We did." "You're a stubborn fool, Sam Boyd. But you've kept this hollow alive longer than most men would have, and now you've taken in one who had nowhere else to go. That's worth more than a sack of beans." A cheer went up from some but not all. On the far edge of the crowd, Samuel saw faces set like stone, men with arms crossed, lips pressed thin. Chief among them was Horace Dunn, owner of the biggest spread north of the river. Dunn had money, cattle and sons enough to run the land. He also had opinions, and one of them was that folks should keep to their own kind. Samuel saw his jaw tighten as neighbors laid gifts at the porch, and knew trouble was coming. Inside the cabin, the orphan girl had woken. She peeked through the cracked door, quilt clutched around her shoulders, eyes wide at the sight of all those wagons. For the first time since she'd come, Samuel heard her voice, soft, raspy, but steady. "Are they here for me?" Samuel swallowed. "Reckon they're here 'cause of you, child, but not against you. Least, not all of them." She nodded once, eyes brimming. "Name's Anna," she whispered. "Anna Lee." It struck Samuel then how long it had been since anyone had given him something as simple as a name. That one word, Anna, seemed to settle into his chest like a coal, warm but heavy. By noon the wagons had unloaded. Samuel's pantry, once bare, was filled fuller than he'd seen in 20 years. He had barrels of flour, potatoes piled high, smoked meat, even a stack of lumber for his sagging barn. But with the gifts came whispers. Neighbors lingered in the yard, talking low. Some praised Samuel's courage, others muttered that he'd brought trouble on himself. And all the while Horace Dunn stood off to the side, his eyes dark. When he finally spoke, the crowd hushed. "You mean to tell me," Dunn said, voice booming, "that we're throwing good food and supplies at a man who can't even feed himself, all 'cause he dragged a stray into his house?" Murmurs rippled. A few men nodded, others scowled. Samuel felt every eye on him. "She ain't a stray," Samuel said, his voice low but steady. "She's a child," Dunn sneered. "A colored child. You'll ruin this valley, Boyd. Mark me." The silence that followed cut colder than the wind. The valley wasn't new to division. Folks remembered the war, remembered neighbors who'd fought blue and neighbors who'd fought gray. They remembered the skirmishes over land, water, and cattle. But in most cases, they'd learned to set those grudges aside to survive. Now, with one girl wrapped in a quilt inside Samuel's cabin, those lines were shifting again. Carson spat in the snow. "Dunn, you talk big from behind a herd of 1,000. Sam may be poor, but he's a better man than you'll ever be." Others spoke up too, women especially, mothers who'd lost children, widows who knew hunger. They said it wasn't about color, it was about mercy. And mercy, once given, had a way of spreading. But not everyone agreed. A handful of men turned their wagons around, refusing to leave their goods. Samuel watched them go with a heavy heart, knowing this kindness came with a cost. That evening, after the crowd had thinned, Samuel sat with Anna by the fire. She ate slowly now, no longer starved, and for the first time, he saw her smile. It was small, but it lit the room more than the flames. "You don't have to be afraid," he told her. "Not while you're under my roof." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "They don't want me here." "Some don't," Samuel admitted, "but enough do. And that's what'll matter." Anna leaned closer to the fire, her quilt slipping from one shoulder. "You didn't have to take me in," she said. Samuel rubbed his beard. "Maybe not, but I couldn't watch you die on my porch either. That's a thing a man don't come back from." While Samuel and Anna found a measure of peace that night, trouble brewed outside Boyd's Hollow. Dunn, furious at being challenged, rode home with a storm in his gut. By the time he reached his ranch, he'd already decided what to do. "This valley won't stand for Boyd's foolishness," he told his sons. "We'll see to it." And so, word began to spread. Men loyal to Dunn muttered in saloons, in church pews, on the road to town. They said Samuel Boyd had lost his senses, that he was stirring up trouble where none was needed. They hinted at taking matters into their own hands if the county sheriff wouldn't. Samuel, for all his stubbornness, had no idea the fire he'd lit was already climbing the wall. The Hollow slept quiet that night, but not for long. Before the week was out, a shadow would fall across Samuel's ranch, one that threatened not just him and Anna, but the fragile thread holding the whole valley together. Because when kindness and hate collide, there's always a reckoning. By midweek, Boyd's Hollow was no longer quiet. Riders passed more often than usual, their breath steaming in the cold air, horses' hooves crunching sharp on the frozen ground. Samuel noticed men pausing at his fence line, peering toward the cabin, then riding on without a word. The valley had always carried gossip like smoke, but now it thickened. At the mercantile in town, folks whispered that Samuel Boyd had gone soft in his old age, taking in a colored orphan when he couldn't keep himself fed. Others said he'd gone noble, finally showing the valley the kind of mercy it forgot, that every story ended the same way. Horace Dunn won't let this stand. Samuel heard the talk himself when he rode in for salt and lamp oil. He kept his head down, but ears don't close so easy. He caught Dunn's name on every tongue, and every mention left a cold weight in his gut. Back at the cabin, Anna began to change. She was still thin, still skittish as a deer, but life crept back into her. She helped sweep the floor, fed the dog scraps, even tried her hand at mending Samuel's shirts. She hummed to herself when she thought no one was listening, low, sweet notes that reminded Samuel of hymns long ago. One night as the wind rattled the shutters, she asked, "Why'd you really take me in?" Samuel stared into the fire, words slow in coming. Because once, someone gave me shelter when I was half dead. Didn't ask who I was, didn't ask what I had, just fed me, let me warm myself. I never forgot. Reckoned it was time to pass it on. Anna didn't say anything, but she moved closer, quilt dragging, and for the first time laid her head against his shoulder. Samuel stiffened, then let out a long breath. In that moment he realized something fierce. He wasn't just keeping her alive, he was keeping her safe. 3 nights later, trouble rode in. Samuel was chopping wood by lantern light when he heard hooves on the frozen road. 4 riders, dark silhouettes against the pale moon, drew up at the gate. Dunn led them, broad-shouldered, fur coat heavy on his back. His sons flanked him like shadows. Boyd Dunn called, voice thick as tar, "Step out." Samuel leaned his axe against the block and walked slow to the fence. "You could have come daylight," he said evenly. "I could have," Dunn said. "But I wanted you to hear this clear, without neighbors meddling. That girl you've taken in don't belong. Not here, not anywhere. Best thing you can do is send her on before this gets ugly." Samuel's jaw tightened. "She's a child, Horace. She's a burden," Dunn snapped. "And you're a fool for feeding her. You think the valley's pity will last. Winter's long, Boyd. Soon enough folks will remember their own bellies. Then you'll find yourself alone and mocked." The words hung heavy. Samuel felt the weight of his years, the ache in his bones. But behind him, through the cabin window, he saw Anna watching, quilt tight around her shoulders, and something in him hardened. "I won't turn her out," he said. Dunn's mouth curled. "Then don't say you weren't warned." He jerked his reins, and the riders wheeled around, hooves pounding into the night. The next day, Sheriff Avery rode out to Boyd's Hollow. He was a fair man, though worn by too many winters and too many disputes. Samuel met him at the gate. "Where, Sam?" Avery began, rubbing the frost from his mustache. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest." "Didn't ask to," Samuel replied. "I know, but Dunn's got influence. Men listen when he talks. Some say he means to starve you out. Others, well, I've heard talk of fire." Samuel's stomach dropped. Fire was every rancher's terror. One torch in a barn, one spark on the cabin roof, and a lifetime's work could vanish. "You gonna stop him?" Samuel asked. Avery sighed. "I'll do what I... But you know how it is, law don't always reach where pride runs hotter than sense." He leaned closer. "Keep watch at night, Sam. And if you see riders you don't know, don't be shy about that rifle of yours." Samuel nodded, but dread gnawed at him. He'd stood against hunger, sickness, even blizzards. But men with hate in their hearts, that was a storm no fence could hold back. That evening, as Samuel bolted the door, Anna spoke up. Her voice trembled, but her words were sharp. "Mr. Boyd, I didn't just wander here. I ran." Samuel turned. "From what?" "From Dunn's ranch," she whispered. The words struck him like a hammer. Anna's eyes glistened in the firelight. "I worked in his kitchen since I was small. After my mama died, they kept me there, fed me scraps, made me sleep on the floor. When winter came, they said I'd best fend for myself. So I walked 2 nights, no shoes, no food, till I saw your light." Samuel felt the air leave his chest. Dunn hadn't just been speaking with hate, he'd been covering shame. If word spread that he'd turned out a child to freeze, his name would sour even among allies. "You should have told me," Samuel said softly. "I was scared," Anna whispered. He knelt, taking her small hand in his rough palm. "You don't need to be scared anymore. Not here." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Her secret made them both targets. The next days were tense. Neighbors still came with gifts, but fewer each time. Whispers grew louder in town. Dunn's sons were seen sharpening fence posts into pikes, stockpiling kerosene. Samuel spent his nights on the porch, with his rifle, the dog at his feet, eyes scanning the dark. Anna slept light, waking at every sound. Once in the dead of night she asked, "Will they come for me?" Samuel stared at the horizon, where storm clouds gathered like bruises. "They might," he said honestly, "but they'll have to go through me first." And the way he said it, Anna believed him. But belief wasn't enough to stop what was coming, because even as Samuel kept watch, Even as Anna clung to the fragile piece of the cabin, Horace Dunn was planning something darker, and before the week was out, Boyd's Hollow would know fire, and Samuel Boyd would face a choice that would test the very marrow of his soul. The night it came was colder than any yet. The wind cut like a knife and the stars were sharp as glass. Samuel sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, dog at his feet, ears tuned to every rustle of the wind. He'd been half expecting it since the sheriff's warning. Trouble carried its own smell like kerosene on dry boards. Around midnight, the dog stiffened. A low growl rumbled from its throat. Samuel followed its gaze to the ridge above the hollow. For a moment, nothing but dark. Then, a flicker, small then growing. Fire. Lord help us, Samuel muttered. The ridge lit orange as riders crested, torches in hand. Their shapes were shadows on horseback. 6, maybe 7. Samuel didn't need names to know who led them. Horace Dunn's voice carried like thunder across the hollow. Boyd, step out or we'll smoke you out like a nest of rats. Inside, Anna bolted upright at the shouting. She stumbled to the door, quilt clutched tight. What is it? Samuel grabbed her shoulders. Stay inside. Keep low. Don't open the door till I say. Her eyes filled with tears. They'll kill you. He forced a grim smile. They'll have to work hard at it. Anna nodded, though her lip trembled. She ducked back toward the corner of the cabin, clutching the dog close, whispering prayers under her breath. Samuel turned back to the porch, rifle ready. The riders spread out along the ridge, torches waving. One hurled his into the dry grass below. Flames licked hungrily at the frost-hardened weeds, crackling like bones snapping. Samuel raised the rifle, took a steady breath, and fired. The crack split the night. One torch fell to the snow as its carrier tumbled from the saddle with a scream. Horses shrieked, stamping in panic. Dunn's voice boomed again. Boyd, you'll hang for that. Samuel chambered another round. You'll burn for this if you don't ride off. The hollow held its breath. Smoke curled, firelight danced, and for a moment, neither side moved. But trouble don't stay quiet long. The sound of the rifle shot echoed down the valley. Lights flickered in distant cabins, lanterns swinging as doors opened. Neighbors roused, confused, then angry. Within minutes riders were coming, not with torches but with buckets, shovels, axe. Carson among them, his old mule loping down the track. Behind him, women with shawls thrown over nightclothes, children carrying pails. The valley had woken, and it was coming to see. Dunn cursed when he saw the lanterns bobbing closer. He barked at his men. Finish it now. Another torch flew, this time striking the edge of Samuel's barn. Dry wood caught, flames crawling up the wall. Samuel fired again, grazing a rider's arm. The man dropped his torch and fled, shrieking, but the barn was burning. Cattle bawled inside, panicked by the smoke. Samuel's gut twisted. Those beasts were his livelihood, meager though they were. He turned to run for them, but Anna's scream froze him. Through the smoke, Dunn himself charged down the ridge, pistol raised, eyes wild in the firelight. Samuel swung his rifle up, but the old weapon jammed. The hammer clicked, useless. Dunn spurred his horse, closing fast. For a heartbeat, Samuel thought it was the end. Then, a shot rang out, not from Samuel's rifle but from the shadows beyond. Dunn's hat flew from his head as the bullet grazed past. His horse reared, throwing him hard into the dirt. Carson rode up, shotgun in hand, face grim. You boys best scatter, unless you want your names written in stone tonight. The sight of the old farmer backed by neighbors rushing in with buckets was enough to rattle Dunn's men. One by one they wheeled and fled into the dark, leaving Dunn cursing and crawling in the snow. Samuel rushed to the barn, yanking open the doors, coughing as smoke poured out. He loosed the cattle, slapping their haunches, driving them into the snow where neighbors doused the flames with bucket after bucket. When the worst had passed, Samuel turned back to the cabin. He found Anna on the porch, pale but steady, clutching a small bucket she'd carried from the trough. Her face was streaked with soot, her hair wild, but her eyes were fierce. I helped, she said, voice shaking but proud. Samuel dropped to one knee, gripping her shoulders. You did, Anna. You saved more than you know. And in her eyes, for the first time he saw something other than fear. He saw fire of her own, not the kind that destroyed but the kind that endured. By dawn the fire was out. The barn was blackened, but still standing. Samuel's cattle, though spooked, were alive. Neighbors lingered, their faces drawn but resolute. Dunn, bloodied and furious, was dragged off by his own sons. "This ain't over, Boyd," he spat. "You think one night changes anything? You'll pay double before spring." Carson spat in the dirt. "Go home, Dunn. Your name's mud now." But Samuel knew better than to think it was finished. Men like Dunn didn't forgive, and they didn't forget. When the neighbors gathered round the fire to warm themselves, arguments flared. Some praised Samuel for standing firm. Others warned he'd brought trouble that would spread. The valley was no longer united. It was split right down the middle, and Anna Lee was the fault line. But as Samuel listened to the clamor, he noticed something important. The ones who stood with him were the ones who'd known loss, hunger, or loneliness. The ones who'd buried children, weathered storms, or gone without. Mercy recognized mercy. That thought settled deep in his chest, heavier than any bullet. Still, he couldn't shake the sheriff's warning. Fire had come once. It could come again. And the valley's patience was thinner than the ice on the creek. As Samuel watched Anna sleep beside the fire that morning, he asked himself the question he dreaded most. How long could he protect her against men like Dunn, and at what cost to the only home he'd ever known? Because winter wasn't done yet, and neither was Horace Dunn. The fire had left its mark. The barn's walls were charred black, the roof sagging where flame had chewed through beams. Samuel worked from sunup to sundown, patching what he could, his hands raw, lungs still stinging from smoke. The cattle grazed nervously in the pasture, spooked by every shift of the wind. But it wasn't the damage that kept Samuel awake at night. It was the knowledge that Horace Dunn hadn't been beaten, only slow. A man like that, rich, proud, mean as a cornered wolf, wouldn't crawl away forever. He'd come back, with more men, sharper schemes, darker intent. And every time Samuel looked at Anna, asleep by the fire, humming while she mended a shirt, smiling faintly when the dog licked her hand, the fear struck harder. He wasn't just guarding cattle or fences anymore. He was guarding her. 3 days after the fire, Sheriff Avery rode out again. His face was lined deeper, like the valley's tension had carved new furrows overnight. "You stirred the pot, good Sam," he said, swinging down from his horse. "I didn't stir it," Samuel muttered. "Dunn did." The sheriff nodded. "True enough. But folks in town half say you stood like a man should, half say you brought war to our doorstep. Dunn's been shouting in the saloon, calling you a traitor to your own kind." Samuel snorted. "I've never been much for kinds." Avery looked him in the eye. "Listen to me. The law can't shield you if he comes again. You've got friends, Carson, the widows, families you've helped. But you've also got enemies now. Keep watch." Samuel leaned on the fence rail, staring at the horizon. "I'll keep watch. Always do." That night after Avery left, Anna sat by the fire with her knees tucked under the quilt. She watched Samuel sharpen his axe, the rasp of stone loud in the cabin's silence. "Why do they hate me?" she asked softly. Samuel paused. "Because hate's easier than hunger, easier than facing their own sins." She tilted her head. "Do you hate them?" Samuel's jaw worked. Finally, he set the axe aside. "I've hated plenty in my life. But hate don't build a fence, don't feed a child, don't keep a man warm at night. All it does is rot him from the inside out. So no, Anna, I don't hate him. I just won't let him take you." Her eyes filled, and she whispered, "Then I won't let them take you either." The following Sunday, the church pews were packed. Word had spread that Dunn meant to speak, and neighbors came from miles to hear. Samuel didn't plan to go. He hadn't set foot inside that chapel in years. But Carson insisted. "You need to be there," the old farmer said. "If you're not, he'll twist the story clean out from under you." So Samuel saddled his old mare, Anna bundled tight in her quilt behind him, and together they rode into town. Inside the church, the air was heavy. Men muttered, women clutched shawls. Dunn stood at the pulpit, bandage on his temple where he'd hit the ground during the fire, his voice booming. "Neighbors, we've let pity blind us. This valley survives because we hold to our ways. Now one man's foolishness threatens us all. He harbors what don't belong. He brings danger to our doors. If we don't put a stop to it, mark me, we'll pay in blood and ruin. Murmurs swelled. Some nodded. Others shifted uneasily. Then Carson rose, shotgun leaning on his shoulder. "Done. You got a sharp tongue, but you forgot something. Sam Boyd saved a life. That's more than you can say with all your land and cattle. What kind of men are we if mercy's a sin?" Voices clashed, the crowd splitting in two. Samuel stood at the back, Anna clutching his coat. He felt every eye on him waiting for his word. Finally he spoke, voice rough, but steady. "I didn't take her in for your praise. I didn't do it for spite. I did it because she'd have died otherwise. You can call me fool, traitor, whatever pleases you, but I won't be a man who shuts his door on a child." Silence followed. For the first time in years, Samuel Boyd had spoken before the valley, and not one soul could miss the weight of it. Dunn's face darkened. He saw his grip slipping, his name souring. Desperation breeds recklessness, and he had plenty of both. That night, he gathered his sons and the meanest hands from his spread. "This ends now," he snarled. "If the valley won't cut Boyd loose, we'll make him wish they had." They saddled up with ropes, kerosene, and steel. A storm was brewing, not of snow, but of men. Samuel sensed it before he heard it. The stillness in the air, the way the dog wouldn't lie down, pacing at the door. He loaded his rifle, set a pistol on the table, and told Anna to stay low. "Whatever happens, you don't leave this cabin unless I tell you," he said. She shook her head fiercely. "I won't hide." "You will," he insisted, voice sharp. "Bravery's fine, but foolish bravery gets folks killed. Promise me, Anna." At last, with tears burning her cheeks, she nodded. Then the sound came, hooves, many this time, pounding like drums, lanterns bobbing in the dark, shadows spreading across the hollow. Dunn's posse had come. They ringed the cabin, torches high. Dunn sat his horse at the front, pistol gleaming. "Boyd," he roared. "Last chance. Hand over the girl and we'll spare your place. Refuse and we burn it all. You, her, everything." Samuel stepped onto the porch, rifle leveled. His voice carried, low but cutting. "If it's fire you want, Dunn, then come light it yourself, but you'd best hope your sons don't mind burying you before the thaw." The men shifted, uneasy. Dunn spat, eyes blazing. That's when lanterns appeared, not Dunn's but from the other side. Carson, and behind him 24 neighbors armed with shotguns, pitchforks, axes, women too, carrying buckets, their faces set hard. "This hollow won't burn tonight," Carson said. "Not for your pride, Dunn, not for hate." The valley had chosen sides. The standoff stretched, torches crackling, breaths steaming. Dunn's men looked to him, waiting. But their eyes betrayed doubt. They weren't eager to shoot into neighbors they'd shared harvest and church pews with. Finally one rider peeled off, then another. Soon half were retreating into the dark. Dunn cursed, shouted, swung his pistol, but no man followed. Left with only his sons, he seethed. "This ain't over, Boyd." Samuel's voice was steady. "It is done. The valley's done with you. Take what pride you've got left and ride." For a long moment, Dunn glared. Then with a snarl he wheeled his horse and disappeared into the night. By morning, the hollow was quiet again. Smoke from abandoned torches curled into the pale sky. Samuel stood on the porch, rifle in hand, Anna beside him. The neighbors, weary but unbowed, began to drift back to their homes. Before they left, Carson clasped Samuel's shoulder. "You stood, Sam. You didn't have to, but you did. Don't forget you ain't alone anymore." Samuel nodded, throat tight. He turned to Anna, who looked up at him with eyes shining. "We made it," she whispered. He pulled her close, voice breaking. "We did, and we will." In the days that followed, something changed. Neighbors came not just with food or tools, but with hammers, saws, lumber. They raised Samuel's barn higher than before, patched fences, filled his cellar. Women taught Anna their songs, gave her dresses, sat her at their table. What had begun with one man's mercy became a community's redemption. Samuel Boyd, the poorest rancher in the valley, who once had nothing but pride, found himself surrounded by plenty, not riches of gold or cattle, but the deeper kind. Respect, kinship, belonging, and Anna Lee, the orphan no one wanted, became the valley's daughter. Now, if you'd been there that winter, standing in Boyd's Hollow with the frost biting your cheeks and the firelight flickering on neighbors' faces, you'd have seen more than a few. You'd have seen the moment a valley chose mercy over hate. One man, poor as dirt, gave shelter to a child on a stormy night. By dawn, 100 neighbors repaid him, and by spring the gift had spread wider than he ever dreamed. Because sometimes it takes just one open door to remind a whole town what it means to be human.